Hi again, everybody. Hope you're all having an awesome weekend. And last night I got to see Evil Dead Rise, written and directed by Cronin. I'll skip the whole preamble about the franchise, except to say that I've always loved this franchise. It's grossly consistent, and I can't think of many other franchises that are this spotless. And that includes this one. We'll get to that in a second, but overall, it's got a great track record so far, and beyond that, if you're a fan, you know why you want to watch this movie, and you probably know why, by extension, you would want to watch a review. I'm assuming no one who comes to a channel like this needs to be fed their breakfast, so, we'll just skip all the preamble stuff. I hadn't actually seen Cronin's previous film, The Hole in the Ground, but I'm definitely curious to check it out now, because right off the bat, I loved this movie. I thought it was excellent, and the more that it sort of ferments in my brain afterwards, the more I sort of find to appreciate about it. So I definitely think I will be going back to see it a second time. The other reason I want to go back and see it a second time is because the cinematography is absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed the use of split focus shots. You get a lot of that very tastefully and very effectively done in this movie. It's a very classic technique that you don't really see that much anymore. And it's kind of too bad because, there's probably a lot of people, especially younger people today, who might look at shots like that. And I think that they'll appreciate them, but they'll be asking themselves like what kind of split screen tools or apps they use to create the effect in post. And they would probably be totally floored when they discovered that the only special effect was the goddamn camera. Ta-da! The cinematographer is a guy named Dave Garbett, who I will confess I'm not all that familiar with, beyond the fact that he did certainly, do his share of work filming Ash vs. Evil Dead. And obviously, tonally, those two are very different. They have enough in common that this still feels authentically linked, certainly. Again, this franchise is very good about having just enough sort of common threads throughout all its entries to make it all feel sort of part and parcel, while still respecting each one's own unique sort of space that it carves out within the domain, for lack of a better way of putting it. But my point after all that rambling, I guess, is basically just that between the tone that he affects with the cinematography on Ash vs. Evil Dead and then moving into this film, Garbett is showing great range as a technician. That last shot before the title in the opening sequence, which is awesome, by the way, that whole sequence, even though some of it does feel a little bit familiar from the trailers, it still comes across really raw and savage and just relentless for those opening minutes. It even has kind of a fun gag to start with that I won't spoil. Again, this isn't a spoiler or anything, it's right there in the trailer, but that sequence and that scene when the one Deadite rises out of the water slowly, when you get that in the movie itself, it's accompanied by a big, huge, epic title, Evil Dead Rise, rising along with the Deadite. And with the music swelling up behind it, it just feels like something out of an old school epic. I was absolutely thrilled to see something like that blazing across a big theater screen. So with that said, you can imagine how sort of flabbergasted I was when I read on IMDb that this movie almost missed theatrical release altogether. Like, their original intention, if what I read can be trusted, is that this was going to debut direct to streaming on HBO Max. But then when the test screenings responded very positively, they decided to give it a go on the big screen. And I couldn't be happier they did, because if this cinematography did not get the chance to be enjoyed and seen on a proper theater screen, that would have been an eternal shame. Seriously, this is one of the best looking movies I've seen all year. This has better cinematography than the majority of the non-horror movies I've seen so far this year, honestly. Beyond what I already said, I think I even would be inclined to see this again just for the opportunity to hopefully catch it on an IMAX screen if that's happening anywhere. Who knows if it is, but if it is, I am going to seek that the hell out, because this is a great achievement on a visual level. But beyond even the fantastic cinematography, the one element to this movie that I'm sure you're going to hear everybody comment on, and the one that will probably generate the most word of mouth, is Alyssa Sutherland's performance as Ellie. She's an Australian actress that I am not really familiar with. I understand she did some time on Vikings and a couple other things like that, but she announces herself in a big way here. First of all, she is not the least bit afraid to go completely grimy and over the top with this character once she's possessed by the Deadite. And furthermore, she has just, as again, I know I'm repeating things that you're hearing a million other people say, but honestly, it's very true. She has such a striking, unique look about her and a unique way about her that she slips into the role of a Deadite perfectly. All her features are utilized to full effect here. On a side note, I read on IMDb that she has been photographed by a lot of the world's most sort of like top tier photographers, and it's easy to see why, because this is a very unique looking woman. You're not going to see anyone else like her on a screen this year as far as a horror movie is concerned. I can guarantee you that. Her acting chops are completely on point here. She knows how to convey intensity from the first frame that you see her. Like, you just know that there is something that she's keeping coiled up inside her, and you do start to find out what that is, you know, before too long. But she's very good at conveying a woman who clearly has a very anxious and active mind. Even though you're not really sure, you know, how to read it, you do know that there is something going on. More so than any other character I can think of in the Evil Dead movies thus far, you know, most of the potent scares and creepiness and unease from her come from just those moments where everything kind of slows down a little bit, even though, like, the shit show once it hits is wonderfully done. A lot of the best moments with Ellie are when the camera is just resting and focusing on her, letting her act the part out and letting her do all sorts of small little quirky things that just get under your skin and just kind of like imprint themselves on your brain, because again, she has such a singular look about her that it makes everything that she says and does that much more impressionable and memorable. Lee Cronin clearly recognized those assets and, you know, should be commended for not trying too hard to ladle more on top of an actress in terms of special effects who is already, from what I can tell, pretty damn special on her own. And the fact that she is, when the movie opens, a relatively freshly single mom who is clearly still trying her best to kind of like keep the family held together even though she is hanging on by a thread herself. It makes it that much more sort of tragic and sad and just wrenching when she becomes possessed and ends up sort of in a way having the demon tap into her inner fear and anxiety about the current state of her parenthood. Once again, Lee Cronin and Sutherland herself are both completely unafraid to take that dark nature to its most satisfyingly bleak and grim conclusion. That's another thing that I thought was a smart move here, was shifting the dynamic from, rather than being a group of friends, to just being a family. And it's just one of those simple twists that makes everything as it unfolds feel that much more fraught. Because obviously your friends are one thing, family is another. Both, you know, are, I would say, ultimately equally valuable. But with family, there is just something there that makes every turn of the screw feel that much more wrenching and compelling. It doesn't hurt that, with the exception of the estranged relationship that is implied between Alyssa Sutherland's character and her sister Beth, played by Lily Sullivan, also very good by the way, beyond that, the family itself, or rather, I guess, the children that Ellie has, are all essentially portrayed as being a very sort of warm, loving family, or at least a family that is, you know, at peace and is simply trying their best to hold it together under pressing circumstances, rather than falling apart or being that, again, that horror movie cliche of the dysfunctional family with unspoken resentment festering beneath the surface. Sometimes that works well. I like the way that that was used in a movie like Hereditary. I kind of like the way that it was implied in movies like The Children and You're Next. But I don't always need that. In fact, it is sort of becoming overused, so it was nice that, you know, rather than giving us that again, they gave us a group that actually likes each other and wants to sort of stay together and help each other. And they don't overstate it or make it too schmaltzy for its own good either. Like, this feels like a relatively realistic and convincing depiction of a family living in a small unit, making them likable people that you can gravitate toward fairly organically, makes it, again, that much more wrenching and compelling and watchable for you as a viewer when more of them start to become possessed and corrupted. And again, that's not any kind of a spoiler. It's right there in the trailer that this sort of stuff starts happening. There's a small part of me that almost wishes I hadn't seen the trailer for this one. I generally avoid them, but I was so giddy when this one was announced that I couldn't help it. I had to kind of get a little bit of a taste, you know. And I wouldn't say that the trailer gives the whole movie away. In fact, most of the moments that you do see in the trailer, do have a little bit more surrounding them that you can still appreciate with fresh eyes when you watch this entire thing. Once it started getting past all the beats that you saw in the trailer and started showing us stuff that was not glimpsed at all beforehand, that was when I really felt the momentum kicking it up another notch. The pacing of this movie is fantastic throughout. Like, it never really lags. I was never bored. But I guess it's just that when you've seen some of these images and these little snippets, like, more than once already, there is that sort of sense of kind of going through the paces, when you're watching it all together to a small extent. So I was glad that there was actually more to the movie than that in the end. I think depending on where people sit with this franchise, they will probably be split on how that family dynamic plays out in its final form. That's all I'm going to say for now. I know that from other reviews I've sort of read and watched that some people, felt like it was out of place for an Evil Dead movie. Some people thought it fit right in. I probably fall in the latter category, but, one way or the other, I actually, enjoyed it because it was trying to, do something that these movies hadn't ever really directly shown us before. Even though I feel like it's aesthetically consistent. It's a new variation on the same sort of aesthetic tone and philosophy that kind of permeates all the Evil Dead movies, even if only to a vague degree. Again, the fact that this is revolving around a family is what makes it feel that much more sort of compelling and appropriate to me. If this same conclusion was reached by just a bunch of friends or sort of like random strangers within the apartment building, that I don't think would have made it quite as effective. But again, with that family dynamic at play, this feels like taking that whole thing to, once again, its most grim and dark possible conclusion. With just a hint of cartoonish goofiness to sort of balance it out. Like throughout the movie, I sort of felt like even though it does feel more along the lines of the 2013 remake in terms of its tone, like I wouldn't call this a horror comedy. But if you know where to look for it, there are little hints here and there of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek mentality and just enough sort of like underlying self-deprecation. I mean, again, it's subtle, but it's there, and it's just enough to kind of like, make you smirk or snicker just a little to kind of give you a little bit of a breather. But in indulging in that little snicker to yourself, you're never going to forget how sort of like just horrifying and gross and terrifying this scenario is. I really like that. Like I think I've said before, like you don't always have to make something either full-bore serious or a complete spoof. There is sometimes a middle ground where a movie can have a relatively serious tone, but still have just a hint of sort of humor and wit about itself. And I feel like they achieve that balance very well here. There's one moment that takes place in the hallway, which again, I will leave for you to enjoy for yourself. But it kind of made me sort of jump and, again, just sort of like chuckle out loud just a little bit at the same time, just because it was so insanely silly. This movie, even in its most grim moments, never forgets that it's entertainment, and it wants you to feel entertained rather than gutted in any given scene. This is probably not the most violent entry in the franchise, and I don't really think it has to be. It's certainly a little less grisly than the 2013 Evil Dead film, but I don't think that it's necessarily trying to upstage that one in any way. And again, it's pretty smart not to try, because the 2013 Evil Dead remake is a pretty high watermark as far as, gory, grimy excess goes. I love it for it, but I mean, you don't need everyone to try and upstage that. This one, I'm not saying that it sets the bar low, but as what is essentially an anthology entry in most respects, I don't think anyone who's a gorehound is going to leave this one feeling like they got gypped. But what I do appreciate is that, again, rather than trying to sort of one-up 2013's Evil Dead, here they make the choice to pair the violent moments with more of a psychological undertone in order to achieve the maximum impact. Not better or worse, just different, and I appreciate that deeply. And once again, like, you know, if you're here for the gravy, believe me, you are not going to feel shortchanged one bit. This movie, for a theatrical release, goes pretty darn hard. Having this movie take place in a high-rise rather than in a cabin in the woods is also a nice change of pace. Even though, if I'm being honest, I sort of feel like Satan's Slaves 2 from 2022 did make better use of the high-rise setting. If you have not seen that, it is, I believe, still available on Shudder. Well worth a look. But anyways, I feel like that made a more inspired use of the dynamics at play when you've got a whole building to kind of play with like that. But overall, again, minor nitpick, because for most of this movie, I was so invested in what was happening with the family that that didn't really bother me all that much. The same scenario probably could have played out in a house just as easily as a high-rise, but honestly, you know what? No matter, because the atmosphere that's created makes every inch of the building that you do see work about as well as you could want it to. I suppose my only other sort of like nitpick that I would mention, which again, this shouldn't even really count as a criticism, this is just kind of more of a musing on my part, but giving Beth the chainsaw, I mean, I understand it, and it's not like I was disappointed or angry to see the chainsaw. In fact, it makes for a very good moment that, again, I'll leave for you to watch for yourself. But given that her character is a guitar tech, there's a running joke throughout the movie that everyone else just kind of thinks she's this sort of like flaky groupie or something like that. But anyway, there was a small part of me that wanted to see her pick up a guitar and an amp and have that kind of be her signature weapon that she takes out the Deadites with in some way, although I mean, I don't know how you could really do that beyond perhaps what we've already seen in Stranger Things at this point, and Stranger Things did it so well that I don't think that anyone else really needs to try and top that. Although, I mean, to be fair, it's not like you would have to have her, you know, play the Deadites to death with music. You could have her just swing that axe around in both senses of the words, you know what I mean, haha. But the way it plays out when she does pick up that chainsaw, it still makes for a really good money shot at the scene's climax. Also, given the storyline that exists between the two sisters, and once again, with the whole general theme of family and how that's all woven together, makes the way things end in this film have some pretty dark implications, actually, that the more I think about them, the more they are chilling and haunting in the best way possible, of course. But again, I feel like I keep coming back to this, but this is really one of those movies that does a good job of engaging you viscerally while you're watching it, and then engaging your mind more sort of intellectually when you're reflecting on it afterwards. So if you've been a fan of this franchise up until now, I think that this is going to keep you in good faith. It'll give you just about everything you could want from a movie like this. I just love that a movie like this, made with a relatively modest budget, but with a lot of heart and a lot of dedication and passion, cast without any big recognizable stars, although I have a feeling that will probably change for Alyssa Sutherland very quickly. And it, against the odds, has gotten a deserved theater release. Like, I just love that a little movie like this is in theaters nationwide on big screens. When you consider that it almost missed a theatrical release altogether, that's all the more reason to feel incredibly lucky. And please, even if, you know, downloading is the norm for you, I'm not here to judge that or lecture about that, but go to the theater, give this movie your money. It deserves to make its money back, and I want the message to be sent back to the filmmakers and the cast that, yes, we want more movies like this, and we still want to see them in theaters. It deserves all the support it can get. While I perhaps don't love this quite as much as 2013's Evil Dead, this is still a very proud entry in the franchise. It leaves the record completely untarnished, and I think it will definitely be one that is going to come up for me come year-end review. So go see this sucker, go see it in IMAX if you can. When it comes out on home media, go buy it, buy a digital copy. I don't care. I want this movie to do well. I want more Evil Dead movies. And again, yes, I want them on the big screen because that's where they deserve to be. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope I can have more content up for you again real soon. It is kind of a weird time for me right now, just for some personal reasons, but I'm doing my best to keep chugging things out where I can. Hope you're having a great weekend, and I will catch you all later. Peace.